Coming up, the Economic Freedom Fighters marks a decade of its existence. The ANC Veterans League holds its elective conference in Boksburg. And a police investigator and cell phone analyst, Colonel Lamberto Steyn, reveals details of cell phone links between the accused in the Meyiwa murder trial. A very good afternoon. If you've just joined us, we're coming to you live from our studios here in Johannesburg. Welcome to Week in Review, the program where we review some of the biggest stories to come out of the week. I'm your host, Mfundo Mabalani. We start here this hour. EFF leader Julius Malema has urged BRICS leaders not to attend the bloc summit in South Africa next month. That's in solidarity with Russian President Vladimir Putin, who will not be attending the gathering. Malema was addressing ambassadors as well as high commissioners of different countries posted in South Africa.
Amanda! Viva!
The EFF says more than 50 representatives of countries came to hear the leader sharing his thoughts about foreign policy. Since the party was launched, it has positioned itself as a Pan-Africanist party with socialist policies. And those who came wasted no time in asking tough questions.
Australia.
My question is, if you don't win a majority next year, what would your approach be to building coalitions?
My name is Han Peters. I'm the ambassador of the Netherlands in this country. I think without any doubt, the energy crisis is top of mind for most South Africans. So what's the plan of the EFF for ending load shedding?
My name is Håkan Juhl, the Swedish ambassador, and since EFF is known as an international movement, I would like to know more about your closest ally on the European and Asian continent when it comes to political movements that you share values with.
This is what Malema had to say on the coalitions in South Africa.
We gave the opposition power in the metros in 2016. Against the ANC, were the ones who removed the ANC. That's how much we've demonstrated our commitment to bringing an alternative government in South Africa. But the oppositions, when it was now the turn to include the EFF, they excluded the EFF.
On the electricity, Malema says that the just energy transition must not be at the expense of energy availability.
The coal power stations that were decommissioned will recommission them. Because you can't decommission a power station for green energy that gives you less than what that power station was giving you. It's illogical. We are all for green. We are all for clean energy, but not at the detriment of the economy of South Africa. We cannot destroy our base to appease USA and the UK. If the green gives me 2,000 megawatts, whatever I'm going to decommission should be giving me 2,000 megawatts or even less. So I know I decommission this one and the alternative is this one, and therefore I don't run short of what I'm requiring to sustain the economy of South Africa and to give our people a reliable electricity. So we also are going to stop this thing of taking out our clean energy, our clean coal to outside countries and leaving us here with a dirty coal and being told we are polluting. The pollution, whether it happens in China, whether it happens in the UK, whether it happens in Germany, whether it happens in the USA, is going to affect us even here in South Africa. So why is there a story that we must not use coal in South Africa, yet we see tons, millions and millions of tons being taken out of South Africa? Where are they going?
He has called on BRICS member countries not to come to South Africa in support of President Vladimir Putin.
We called for BRICS heads of states to stay away in solidarity with President Putin, because today is President Putin, tomorrow it will be the Chinese president, the Indian president, or even the president of Brazil. So in solidarity with President Putin, they must send their ministers and say, we're not coming, because the establishment of BRICS was to create an alternative platform to avoid this type of nonsensical arrangement.
The EFF leader has called on Zimbabweans to go home and vote in large numbers in the upcoming elections.
They must never despair. They must continue to fight for their country and reclaim it from kleptocracy and the criminality that has hijacked Zimbabwe. We want the Zimbabweans to fight to take over their own country back. We want the international community to lift the sanctions and let's get Zimbabwe to work again. These people who are saying they are Zimbabweans all over are the ones who should be marching in solidarity with the people of Zimbabwe and demanding free and fair elections in Zimbabwe. This thing of pretentious elections is not going to work, is not going to deliver confidence, the much needed confidence that Zimbabweans need now from the international community to go back and reinvest then to lift the sanctions.
Sophie Mkwenu, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, now just to give you a bit of an update, what you see on that small box is the CIC arriving at the FNB Stadium. It seems he's flanked there by Floyd Shibambu as well as Marshal Dlamini, the Secretary General. But to this story now, thousands of EFF supporters are converging at the FNB Stadium in Soweto. That's for the party's 10th anniversary celebrations. The rally is a culmination of a number of events, including a carnival last weekend in Alexandra, Johannesburg, a public lecture addressed by Kenyan academic Professor Patrick Lumumba, as well as a commemoration of the 2012 massacre in Marikana earlier this week. Now, EFF President Julius Malema is scheduled to speak at around 2 o'clock, where he's expected to trace the party's progression from its establishment back in 2013 in Soweto to it becoming the third largest party in the country, commanding approximately 10% of the popular vote. For more on this, we're now joined by our reporter, Natasha Apiri. Good afternoon, Natasha. So today's most certainly a day for celebration for EFF members, but it's also a day to reflect on the past 10 years, from its founding to its first expulsions. We remember it was Andile Mqidama and Paul Ramakatsa back in 2015. But also they'll be reflecting on their victories in our courts. Just help us reflect on these milestones as the party marks 10 years in existence.
Definitely, Mfundo. Thank you so much. Once again, we continue to bring you live coverage here of the EFF's 10th anniversary here at the FNB Stadium. And I can tell you that the stadium is almost full to capacity. You're quite right there. EFF leader Julius Malema and the leadership of the EFF have now arrived at the stadium. We're counting down to those minutes to his address that will be at 2 p.m. You talk about the victories of the EFF, Mfundo. I mean, this whole morning in our interviews and engagements with the leadership of the EFF, they've reflected how, they've managed to champion the rights of the workers through the EFF's labor desk, the insourcing of workers, which that the EFF has, loudly boasted about, that they have helped key institutions of higher learning to insource their workers, as well as certain municipalities, specifically those in Johannesburg and Tshwane. But to actually unpack, everything to do with the EFF and, reflect on the state of the organization over the past 10 years, I'm joined by independent political commentator, Mr. Makosini Mkicha. Thank you so much for joining us on SABC News. So, 10 years ago, the EFF was founded in Marikana, and they introduced their 7 non-negotiable pillars. Some are nationalization, of your banks, of your mines, the expropriation of land without compensation, free housing, open, accountable, corrupt government and society without fear of victimization by state agencies, the massive development in the development of the African economy. When you look at these policies, do they still resonate with South Africans 10 years down the line? And are they feasible? Specifically, your free houses, your free sanitation, your free education.
Look, I think the important thing for me is to say that they are not yet in government, and they are an opposition party and a very vocal one. I think it can be seen as a success on their part that they have brought the ANC to a point where it even talks about expropriation of land without compensation, where there is talk of state bank. These are things that were championed by Julius Malema's leadership when he was in the ANC Youth League. As to whether they are feasible, looking at the world economy the way it is, I think that when you start talking about nationalization of banks, you are likely to get a reaction from other players in the global economy. Look, it has happened. Such things have happened in Zimbabwe, perhaps with not the results that they would have wanted to see. But even in Zimbabwe, there was a point where, it could very well be the case now, where companies that are coming to invest in Zimbabwe accept that there is indigenization in Zimbabwe. I think if South Africa continues to be a good prospect for investments, you can talk about some structural changes to the economy so that you give black people an opportunity also to participate. And I think whether it resonates with the people or it doesn't, there is a reality that we have to confront, which is that South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. And what makes that worse, it is that is racially based. So which means from 1994, when we attained our freedom, white people have gotten richer and black people still remain at the bottom end of the scale. Now you have to do something to change that. Whether the EFF has the right programs or the ANC has the right programs, there's a subject for debate. But I think the fact that there is talk of expropriation of land without compensation, that there is even a discussion that is taking place at parliamentary level, it has to be the success of the EFF.
Let's talk about their growth at the polls. I mean, just a year after their inception, or when they launched the party at the 2014 general elections, I mean, they managed to get 6.35% of the vote, bagging them 25 seats in parliament. And you fast forward to the 2019 elections where they got over 10% and they've managed to maintain 44 seats in parliament. Do you see this growth path actually increasing especially when you talk about next year?
Look, the growth is going to be there. Whether it is going to be at the rate at which they want it to be, I'm not sure about that. The EFF has a very difficult problem that they haven't quite navigated, in my view, and that is that South Africa generally is a conservative country, right? The black population in South Africa, in my view, is very conservative. They have a position, in the majority of cases, they would have a position on immigration, for instance. The EFF says open borders or something to that effect. And, in the main, people feel that the borders should be secured and that, there should be greater control on immigration. So even the tactics of the EFF, the things that they do, how they dress when they go to parliament, and their behavior there in some cases, those things do not resonate with the majority of South Africans, particularly black South Africans, who remain conservative, in my view. So they'll have to work against that. But what could work for them is that the young people who are supporting the EFF today are going to be the elders of tomorrow, and the conservative people that we have who are older, through attrition, their numbers are going to be reduced. So there is a likelihood that the EFF can grow to a point where it can be a real threat to whoever is the governing party at the time. But at this time, I think they are going to grow. I just do not think that they are going to grow at the pace that they want to grow at.
All right, those are live visuals there. Unfortunately, we've lost our connection to our reporter Natasha Piri while in conversation there with Makosini. But as you can see, that is Commander-in-Chief of the Economic Freedom Fighters, Julius Malema, arriving on stage, as I said a bit earlier, flanked by Floyd Shivambu, the DP, as well as the SG of the party, Marshall Dlamini. As you can see there in high spirits, dancing there with Ringo Madlingos, one of the members of parliament, and as many would also know, a musician in his own right. Very, very celebrated in the country. A joyous, momentous occasion for EFF members today. But as you would have heard there from Makosini stating that the growth trajectory is a very topical one. many are not particularly sure of how much they would grow. Would it be that 3% that has been bandied about, and the EFF has also suggested perhaps they would grow by 3% or slightly lesser? Or even another insertion into this narrative where some are saying perhaps they have actually hit that popularity plateau, where perhaps, if anything now, the numbers could start to decrease. But what can be said about the EFF 10 years on is that they must certainly have had a footprint and a great impact in the South African body politic currently. So it will be interesting as well to hear what the EFF leader has to say come 2 o'clock to not just EFF members, but the electorate, because as many have said, this is possibly now the beginning of the 2024 election campaign. So a very important message that many South Africans will be looking to hear, be it about unemployment, how they plan, even in their manifesto, to stimulate growth in the country or even address that very unemployment, be it inequality in society. So quite a lot is expected out of this speech. A lot is riding on it. A very auspicious day. Let's listen in a bit.
Amandla! Amandla! Viva EFF! Viva! Viva EFF! Viva! Forward to economic freedom in our lifetime. Forward! Forward to economic freedom in our lifetime. Forward! Long live to the undying spirit of Mama Winnie. Long live!
All right, we'll continue to monitor as the program gets underway there at the FNB Stadium. But let's take you to another story. ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula has opened the ANC Veterans League Conference in Boksburg. The conference will run until Sunday. It follows national conferences of the ANC's Youth League and Women's League, which saw the election of new leaders. Mbalula called on the party's veterans to assist in the renewal of the African National Congress.
As the moral compass of the organization, you duly participate in the work of the organization in order to guide against the pitfalls which, from the vantage point of your lived experience, could easily be understood and appropriately attended to. Comrades, we meet here today against a backdrop of changing economic outlooks, both from the domestic and global context. Both our economy and the global economy have just emerged from one of the worst challenges occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has been compounded by the geopolitical conflicts in Russia, Ukraine, and to some extent NATO. Comrades, we have nonetheless made serious strides in the last 7 months to turn around the economic situation in our country. And some of the positive results are beginning to show results.
All right, more news on the other side of this break. Do stay with us.
With SABC Plus, it's your entertainment your way. Discover new favorites, create personalized watch lists, and enjoy seamless streaming across multiple devices. You can record or catch up and never miss the drama. Binge your favorite shows, catch exclusive pop-up channels, or set reminders to watch episodes as they air. Visit sabcplus.com or download the app. SABC Plus, everywhere, for everyone, always.
Are you interested in the luxurious and flexy vibes of leisure? And staying on top of fashion, beauty, and wellness trends? Are you interested in live music performances and exploring the creativity in the arts? Or just love marveling at the amazing global scenery? Are you hitting the road for an all-time adventure while you're nibbling here and there? Well, Trends Live is where all of that and more is at. We're here to set the mood for the weekend and keep you up to date on the latest trends. We're switching it up. Catch us on our new time slot delivered to you by fresh new faces and an exceptional team. See you every Friday at 8 p.m. on the SABC News Channel.
Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, a police investigator and cell phone analyst, Colonel Lambertus Steyn, has revealed details of cell phone links between the accused in the Senzo Meyiwa murder trial. The investigator had already revealed links between Meyiwa's girlfriend, Kelly Khumalo, and one of the 5 men accused of murdering Meyiwa back in 2014.
Well, it was one bombshell after the other. Colonel Lambertus Steyn says cell phone data has connected all the accused except number 4, and that they knew each other.
Given this picture, is there an indication as to who the central figure is, who the central person is?
It's not possible to determine. I can just determine that the suspects in front of the court knows each other. They did talk to each other. But if you look at suspect number 5 and suspect number 3, they did speak to each other. So I will say that's going to be, according to my opinion, the main people.
Steyn also testified that Meyiwa's phone pinged at the hospital tower after 10 p.m. on the evening of the tragedy. While this contradicts previous testimony by Zandi Khumalo that Meyiwa's phone was found inside the house. And then, in another startling revelation, a SIM swap was done on Meyiwa's SIM card a day after he was killed.
We follow up on the handset number and then link to the number 2772149389, and it belongs to David Matebula.
David Matebula.
And there was 8 calls between David Matebula and Kelly Khumalo. But my opinion is it could be that it's an old phone of David Matebula that they just used to put in the new SIM card.
Previous witnesses have testified that one of the intruders who entered the house had dreadlocks, and in another twist, the phone Steyn says was confiscated from accused number 3, Mthobisi Mncube, when he was arrested, contained photos where he has dreadlocks.
Now, when you say the dreadlocks, I hear you, but whose dreadlocks are we talking about on that photo?
Suspect number 5, suspect number 3.
Suspect number 3, okay, fine. Dreadlocks of suspect number 3.
Cross-examination is expected to start on Monday. Criselda Lewis, SABC News at the High Court in Pretoria.
Still in our courts, rapper and television presenter Jub Jub Maruanya is back in court next month after being released on bail of 10,000 rand. He appeared in the Johannesburg Magistrate Court on charges of rape, attempted murder as well as assault.
The musician handed himself over to the police at the Brixton police station in Johannesburg. This after a warrant of arrest was issued against him. His legal representative says Jub Jub has lost faith in the justice system. This after it emerged the alleged offences are said to have taken place between 2006 and 2010.
He's devastated. It's at the time where he doesn't understand what are these charges all about, why they crop up now. So he's so disappointed with the justice system and how things are being done. It seems like women are given so much power to an extent that they can bring him down any man who is rising up.
Maruhanya's bail conditions include handing over his travel documents to the investigating officer. He is not allowed to leave the country or make contact with the plaintiffs.
We can confirm as the NPA that Mr. Mulemo Maruhanya has been charged with 3 counts of rape, 2 counts of attempted murder, as well as 1 count of assault.
The NPA says Maruhanya's previous conviction has no bearing on the pending case. Balentle Mthethwa, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Judgment has been reserved in an urgent application brought by State Prosecutor Advocate Billy Downer, as well as journalist Karen Morn, who requested a full bench of the High Court to enforce the court order of setting aside their private prosecution by former President Jacob Zuma. Zuma is charging Downer with leaking a confidential document on his health to Morn during the former president's marathon corruption trial. Now, last month, a full bench of the Pietermaritzburg High Court set aside the private prosecution, saying it was unlawful. Zuma has since filed a notice of intention to appeal that order.
In an earlier judgment handed down by the High Court, the court interdicted and restrained the former president from proceeding with and taking any further steps to privately prosecute Morn and Downer. Zuma was also ordered to cover all costs incurred. In the current application, Morn is seeking that the court upholds the suspension of the summons as ruled in June, pending Zuma's appeal. Advocate Stephen Budlander, who represents Morn, told the court the former president instituted the private prosecution against his client to bully her, and she is subjected to what he calls torrents of abuse on social media. Downer's representative advocate Jeff Budlander argued that Zuma has outlined in court papers that his private prosecution bid is solely about removing Downer as the prosecutor in his corruption trial. Zuma's legal counsel denied that the private prosecution against Downer is an attempt to halt the corruption trial. They also indicated to the court that they will exercise their right to automatically appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeal if any order is granted against them.
It was really a waste of time because whichever way it goes, whether they had won or not won, even if they had succeeded, or let's say they succeed on Monday, for argument's sake, it would definitely be one-pager, a notice of appeal, and which would suspend that success. So it will be a hollow victory in any event. So really there's no point in having been here. So this is all about people that think they're above the law. This is about people that think that law should not apply equally to them.
Analysts say due to the urgency of the application, the judgment could be handed down before the private prosecution matter resumes.
Holistically, we would say it's going to be interesting to hear what the court will say in considering the issue of agency, in considering what the other party have submitted in terms of irreparable harm that they will suffer should they be taken to a private prosecution. They also spoke highly of the fact that this is a total abuse of court processes, and it's going to be interesting to hear what the court will say.
Former President Jacob Zuma's private prosecution case is set to be heard on the 4th of August. Jade Paulser, SABC News, Pietermaritzburg.
The case of 8 police officers accused of assaulting 3 members of the public on the N1 highway in Johannesburg earlier this month has been postponed to the 1st of August in the Randburg Magistrate Court. When court resumes, it's expected it will deliver the judgment in the bail application of the 8 accused. The officers, who are part of the Deputy President Paul Mashadile's VIP Protection Services unit, are facing a number of charges. Among those charges are pointing a firearm, damage to property, assault, reckless and negligent driving, and an attempt to defeat the ends of justice. A motorist captured the incident on camera and it subsequently went viral on social media. To the story now, the 8 candidates who will be interviewed for the position of public protector have been announced. 14 names were nominated out of the 36 by the ad hoc committee dealing with this matter, and the top 8 who received the most nominations from parties made the cut.
The 8 names will go through a vetting and screening process. If all 8 survive this, they will be called to Parliament for interviews. The 8 names selected are Ms. Muvango Lukaimane, who received 5 nominations from the committee, Advocate Seliso Tipanyane, who also received 5 thumbs up, Advocate Lynn Murray got 4 nods, Acting Public Protector Advocate Koleka Kaleka also came in with 4, Advocate Oliver Josie got 3, Advocate Thomas Ntsewa 3, Magistrate Joanna Ledwaba with 2 and Professor Boitumelo Musiniane also with 2. Not all parties were completely satisfied with how the process played out.
You're asking us to nominate 8 candidates, and it is quite obvious that those will be political appointees of the different political parties.
The IFP objected to these comments.
Not a single person here was voted by Dingata. First time I'm seeing them. And whoever I'm going to propose here is on the basis of going through their interviews, their motivation, and whoever has contributed. And that is it. Simple as that. Help us. I'm not sure what people seek to achieve here.
The committee agreed to move forward with these names. According to Parliament's schedule, the committees will take place over 2 days towards the end of August. The committee will then deliberate on these and recommend a name to the National Assembly. Abra Babia, SABC News, Parliament.
The Democratic Alliance has taken its fight against the Employment Equity Act to court. In addition, the party says it will scrap the legislation once it governs through a coalition after next year's general elections. The DA marched to Parliament to highlight its objection to the act, which was signed by President Cyril Ramaphosa a bit earlier this year.
The DA painted some of Cape Town streets blue. The party was voicing its objection to the Employment Equity Amendment Act. Among other things, the Act allows the Minister of Employment and Labour to identify and set employment equity numerical targets for each economic sector. And the party is totally against this.
There's absolutely clarity in our mind. We will scrap the racial employment equity legislation that the ANC has put on the table, and we will put forward in a national government because we believe we will be part of a national coalition government. And the policy that we will put instead of this racial-based policy is an economic justice framework, because that is more fair for the employment equity of all the people in South Africa.
It claims that the legislation will result in thousands of job losses based on the race.
Instead of growing the economy, instead of creating jobs for our people, they introduce race quotas that are going to see 600,000 of our citizens lose their jobs based on nothing other than the color of their skin.
And wants other provinces to follow in the footsteps of the Western Cape and allow the party to be in government.
We already got them out of government here in Cape Town, and look at your city, how beautiful it is today. We've got them out of the Western Cape, and look how beautiful your province is. Crime down 14%, 360,000 jobs up in the last quarter. This is a province that's working. The rest of South Africa is breaking, and this province is working. Why? Because it's always better where the DA is.
No memorandum was handed over to the legislative arm of government. The DA says the best defiance campaign against the Employment Equity Amendment Act is for South Africans to register in numbers and vote for the party in next year's general elections. Lula Mamatya, SABC News, Parliament.
All right, more news on the other side of this break. Do stay with us.
Honourable members, order. Mr. President, do you support expropriation of mines?
We have no policy to expropriate.
Simple yes or no
mines.
question.
Your inability to articulate that even in this parliament speaks volumes.
But can you tell me whether your government has got a safety and security plan in place for the eventuality of a grip to collapse?
The people of South Africa will be the first to know.
We take you behind the scenes of the industry.
From new breakthroughs in science and medicine.
And introduce you to some of the big players that are shaping the future of technology.
We need a human-centered, evolution. We should use this 4IR to advance people, not to disadvantage people.
To the latest gadgets and apps that are revolutionizing the way we live our lives, this show is the go-to source. Catch Network every Saturday at 8 p.m.
Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, let's turn our attention to some of the developments in our courts this week. We start with the high-profile Senzo Meyiwa case, where a police officer revealed that one of the men arrested in connection with Meyiwa's murder had cell phone conversations with Meyiwa's girlfriend, Kelly Khumalo. The witness told the Gauteng High Court in Pretoria that the first call lasted about 2 minutes. He testified that another call made 11 days before Meyiwa was killed was just more than a minute. The state's fourth witness, Colonel Lamberta Steyn, who's based at the National Cold Case Unit, is employed as a data analyst and investigation officer. He analyzed cell phone data records of people who were with Meyiwa on the night he was killed. We're now joined by legal analyst Nthabiseng Dubazana of Dubazana Attorneys just to unpack some of these big stories. And Nthabiseng, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time. Now, from a legal perspective, how significant is the evidence by Colonel Steyn?
At this stage, we can say it is not as significant as, we would like it to be. The fact that there is evidence that there was a phone call conversation between one of the accused and Kelly Khumalo doesn't necessarily mean that they were in cahoots, so to speak, in terms of the murder or the killing of Senzo Meyiwa. What it does say is that they know each other. But the main issue for me when I look at the evidence so far is that the identity of the people that entered the house is still in question. When we look at the evidence that has been led so far, no one can really say, I can point out X, Y, and Z who were there in the house. But the fact that cell phone pinned into Section 205 have pinned them around the area or having talked to somebody kind of brings the question, but it doesn't say that they were actually present on the day in question.
So what I'm gathering from you is that you're saying no one knows the contents of the alleged conversation at this point, if it indeed took place. And you're saying that there could be a version put forward by Kelly Khumalo or Fiso Guhle that could clear them as to what exactly they would have been discussing. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So, and that conversation may then determine whether or not it had anything to do with this. But when we hear the evidence that has been led, is that the cell phone, Kelly was wiped, and so we wouldn't probably know what on her end what was happening. We're not sure. We hear that the cell phone Senzo Meyiwa there was a SIM shop that was happening over there. So there's a little bit of question on why these things happened moments before and moments after the incident, what was being hidden, but we don't have those answers.
There were also a few contradictions that were brought to the fore here, particularly the whereabouts of the deceased's cell phone, because we had listened to testimony Yazandile, and there she had indicated that the phone was in the house, but as per Colonel Steyn, actually they could locate it at the hospital. How much of an impact would that type of a contradiction have on the case itself?
If we remember the cross-examination from the different defense counsels, they have always put the version that the incident or the scene was tampered with in one manner or another. So now we have a situation wherein cell phone was in the house and cell phone was in the hospital. So it makes you wonder why there was a difference there. Could it be that indeed the cell phone did go to the hospital and then it was brought back to the house? And if it was brought back to the house, was it placed there? Was it tampered with in order for the SIM swap to happen? Would it then throw a doubt, so to speak, onto what exactly happened at the scene at the house that was tampered with, and what the police finally arrived to was indeed what was already there or what was staged by the people that were there.
Now, we all heard that among the witnesses, or at least Kelly Khumalo will not be among the witnesses. Can you just take us through exactly what criteria would be used when deciding who will be among the witnesses? Because in this instance, there was more than one person in the house on the day that Senzo Meyiwa lost his life. But what would then be the selection criteria of who takes the stand and who doesn't?
Unfortunately, that is within the discretion of the state. They know how they want to plot out their case and how they're going to call X, Y, and Z. So the reasons why they're not calling Kelly Khumalo to the stand is only known to them. They haven't exactly given the court reasons, and they don't really have to. But as a result, because her statement was disclosed to the defense attorneys, they now have a free-for-all card, so to speak, that once a defense case opens, they can request the court to subpoena Kelly to come to the court and give evidence. And should they choose not to do so, the presiding officer himself can choose to call her to the stand stand as a court witness to get clarification, because her name has been mentioned so many times so far.
I ask this question particularly because it's something that has even cropped up in social spaces where many seem to think that perhaps there could be nefarious reasons as to the decision not to call. Could it also just be a strategy of a particular case, that here in this instance you would decide that it would be repetition anyway, everybody was in the house, so if you've heard from one, you've heard from them all, or in some instances it would be a decision taken to say perhaps witness X might actually jeopardize the case, they're not strong enough, and perhaps other questions could crop up, so you decide to not have them come onto the stand?
Actually, all of those reasons you've given are valid. It could be one of those reasons why the state has made a decision not to call her. Another one could be that when we look at the letter that was signed by the DPP in the first trial, wherein they said that they are waiting for this matter to end to make a decision on what to do with the accused persons in the second docket. That could be part of the reasons why they're not calling her to the stand. Maybe she's going to be an accused in the second docket. We don't know. But it could be part of the reason.
Then to the judge. There have been mixed views of the conduct of the judge, some feeling he doesn't necessarily give the advocates room to do their work. There have been several interjections. What is your view on just the judge's conduct thus far?
I think my view would be a little bit biased. I'm a defense attorney mostly. So, we don't like getting interrupted, especially when we haven't gotten to our point. And when the judge doesn't allow us to get there, it does get kind of frustrating. But having said that, you can see that he wants to kind of clear out the questions, not to have a round and around question without getting to the crux of the matter. But that sometimes tends to look like he wants to speak on behalf of the witness. If you remember his exchange with Advocate Mshololo, it would be that, no, but my lord, I need to hear that from the client. It can't be something that you say on behalf of the client, which is what part of my pet peeve. Allow the witness to answer the question. And if they're going to answer in the way that you presumed, great. But if they don't, it means that you're putting words in the mouth of the witness. So that was my little pet peeve as the exchange that was happening between the judge and the counsel.
All right. And Thabiseng, thank you very much for your insights this afternoon. That's a legal analyst in Thabiseng Dubazana of Dubazana Attorneys speaking to us. We shift our focus to this story now. President Cyril Ramaphosa has repeated his call for peace in Russia's war with Ukraine. He was speaking as the Russia-Africa summit came to a close in the Russian city of St. Petersburg. At the summit, African leaders sounded the calls for independence from Western influence in the wake of their potentially beneficial engagements with Russia, which has been criticized for its war with Ukraine.
Africa needs to be independent. That was President Cyril Ramaphosa's message on the final day of the Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg. President Ramaphosa is one of 17 African heads of state that took part in the summit intended to create cooperation and strategic development ties with Russia.
African countries should, as sovereign states, be able to also pursue their own independent foreign policy approaches that are not beholden to any other major global power or blocs.
Second Russia-Africa summit.
At the summit, President Ramaphosa, a member of the African Leaders Peace Mission, yet again emphasized Africa's desire to see Russia arrive at a peaceful settlement in its conflict with Ukraine. The conflict has had adverse effects on Africa, leading to food and energy shortages.
It is our hope that constructive engagement and negotiation can bring about an end to the ongoing conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine.
The summit in St. Petersburg has been a platform for Russia to forge ties with African nations. Russia has offered to invest in energy, security, agriculture and education. The Kremlin has also promised to supply its grain and other food to 6 African countries free of charge.
When you deal with partners who deal with you out of respect, who say you have the minerals, let us come in with whatever the expertise, the knowledge, let's share, and share equally, as opposed to what Africa has been dealing with in the past few years, which has been more like master-servant kind of relationships.
With the growing geopolitical tide, South Africa hosts the next African engagement with Russia at the BRICS summit in August. Some African countries have requested to join the bloc.
Ours is about a multipolar, a multilateral system that has to be supported, and therefore a multipolar system is the way to go. So the growth of BRICS is also promoting diversity. But it does also show that something must be done in the United Nations.
President Vladimir Putin will not attend physically. Overall, the engagements at this year's Russia-Africa summit have been yielding for the continent. Russia says it will support African nations in investment and infrastructure development, but it remains far off from reaching a solution over the Ukraine conflict, despite the efforts by African leaders. Leon Sanyange, SABC News, St. Petersburg, Russia.
All right, just to remind you of our big story that we're tracking today, that's the EFF's 10th celebrations currently underway at the FNB Stadium. You can see from that little block there on your left, as you can see, Nkululeko Dunga is currently speaking. 2 o'clock, we expect the Commander-in-Chief to address EFF members as well as the nation. We will certainly take you there. But for now, more news after the break. Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, the South African Federation of Trade Unions has hit out at e-hailing companies for ill treatment of their drivers. SAFTU General Secretary, that's Zuma says working conditions for e-hailing drivers are so bad they did not have proper channels where they can relay their complaints, calling on drivers to be organized into unions. A few days ago, e-hailing drivers protested in regions over complaints about commission structures, crime and other labor-related issues. They held talks with SAFTU, whose Secretary General, Zuma joins us now for a little bit more on that engagement. Mr. Vavi, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time. One would say that particular engagement is significant on many levels because for some there's been this confusion around e-hailing drivers. Are they considered partners of perhaps an Uber or a Bolt, or are they businessmen or even employees? But at this point, they've decided to talk to a labor federation. What exactly was the purpose thereof?
Well, thank you very much, Mfundo, for inviting SAFTU to participate in your program this afternoon. But before I answer your question, may I just take 10 seconds to wish the economic freedom fighters 10th anniversary rally and celebration very well, currently unfolding at the FNB Stadium. This is a very important milestone in the history of the working class forces, the search for unity in our country. And the EFF enters this first decade, or ends it, and enters the second decade much more stronger than they were initially, much more united, much more relevant than any other time. And this is a very important milestone in our view, and they deserve every good wishes by all South Africans of goodwill. We may not agree with everything that they stand for, but the coming into the political scene by the EFF have made a significant progress and a contribution in the political landscape of our country. Mm-hmm. Now, on your question, we had a discussion with the minister and a delegation of his department yesterday, Minister of Employment and Labor, and where we were presenting the plight of not just e-hailing workers, but we also took up the issue with him of the taxi drivers as well as the EPWP workers. Now, let's start with the e-hailing drivers. We are so correct. The capital is now using every technical revolution it can lay its hands on to maximize profit and to continue pursuing the logic of profit. Now there is just an app that all of us can use to access a movement to move from point A and B in a lightning speed. Going are the days where workers must go to the taxi rank, the bus rank, and the train station. Things are changing. This new revolution of transportation have its own labor problems. So firstly, as you are pointing out, the employers, the developers of this app are now refusing to take responsibility as employers. They want to con and to mislead the thousands and thousands of drivers in South Africa and all over the world into believing that they are co-owners of the business and that they are independent contractors. Nothing can be further than the truth. We argue from SAFTU, so are the drivers themselves arguing that they are workers, they are employees of these companies, and the only thing they bring to the table, which is different from an ordinary worker, is that they must buy, purchase, rent their own tools of trade. They must buy their own cars, they must rent their own cars, scooters, and they must service them, they must fill fuel, they must pay taxes in the form of the VAT now that they have some income, and they must pay for the toll gates that are all over the country. But these companies, such as Uber, for example, insist that these workers are employers on their own, and yet they take a 25% for every trip these drivers get through their app, and they take a 6% for a booking fee, which makes them to rate a 31%. No wonder that Uber have scored 146 billion rands, and no wonder Bolt is now valued at 143 billion rands, at least in the year 2022.
But does this not boil down to interpretation here? That is probably a battle that might not be won easily as to what exactly should they be referred to? Are they employees or are they partners? Because the other aspect is that their clock-in times are not monitored. One can decide to go to work today and not tomorrow, and vice versa. So in that instance, wouldn't many say it boils down to interpretation that still they'll probably be considered partners, if anything else?
Well, every driver, and mostly e-hailing drivers, by 4 or 5 o'clock, they are up in the streets already to catch the earliest when. And they know that if they don't wake up at those odd hours, there will be no business for them during the day, just like the taxi drivers. They know that the business become more active after 4 o'clock and until 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. And it is exactly those early hours, 4 o'clock and 9, 10 o'clock in the evening, that they become even more vulnerable from scoundrels of society who are able to get to purchase from these shops unregistered tools and be able to order and the taxi or the e-hailing, and then rob them, beat them, rape them, and hijack them. So the stories of them being exposed to the violence and being the victims of the extremely high levels of violence in South Africa are still to be properly reported by the media in South Africa. So this is a very tough job. It's a job. And everybody who had an option of not doing the job will be doing something else. But when you are poor, you have no option but to submit yourself to these horrible working conditions.
What were the outcomes of those talks, particularly around their safety?
Well, the minister shares our concern and agrees that perhaps through a small technical team, we have to take that discussion forward. And the first thing that we have to do as the trade union, SAFTU in particular, is to take up a case that was referred to the CCMA by a SAFTU affiliate, NUPSO, in 2017, where the CCMA correctly ruled that he had a jurisdiction and that he ruled that the blocking of a driver from the app was or constituted a dismissal without any hearing, something that is at odds with the Constitution and our labor laws in the country. And it's a pity that the OPA then referred that matter to the labor court, and they won on the basis that the union and the driver would have cited a wrong respondent, being a OPA in London, instead of chasing and tracking the representatives of OPA here in South Africa. So we are taking that issue up. We will follow it up where it is still possible to refer it to the appeals court. We will do so. But if it means that we must register a new case at the CCMA, as there are hundreds of workers who are being blocked from the app all the time, then we will do so. And that's going to take us the first step. It will constitute the first step towards the CCMA, to the Labour Court, to the Appeals Court, and eventually to the Constitutional Court, if the OPAs will still insist, like they are not employers, but they are co-owners of this application with the users, which is the drivers in this instance.
All right, Mr. Vavian, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. That was SAFTU General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavian. That's where I leave it for today. Enjoy your day further. See you tomorrow.